And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We're here with Michael from Away from the Numbers to preview Vancouver for our not so deep dive. This is the way we'll call this. We're not going to go super deep, but we're going to go deep enough. Michael, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing very well. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah. Um, we just got to talking about the great way that you came up with the name of your podcast, and just out of curiosity here, is Vancouver the local side for you? Is that how you started following? I know you mentioned that you're into the amateur league as well, but how did Vancouver come about?
Well, yeah, I'm originally from Scotland, as you can probably tell from my accent. So I moved over here in 2007, and when we were looking for a place in Canada to come to, it had to be a place that had a soccer team. So I've basically watched the Whitecaps since 2008 in their pre-MLS days. I was part of the football fanzine movement over in Scotland. So then we had a website for my local team there. And then I started covering the Whitecaps in 2009 as a blog. And the podcast's been going since 2013. My understanding is we're the longest running English language soccer podcast in Canada.
Wow.
There's a French language one that started just before us, which is annoying. Otherwise, we could say we are the longest. But yeah, so we've just been going for a very long time, and the Whitecaps is my local team.
Love that. Well, we're very happy to have you and the prestige that your podcast clearly carries on our show to talk Vancouver Whitecaps and just a little bit about what their 2024 season is going to look like. But before we do that, of course, as we've done for the last 200 plus episodes, we got to do Scarf of the Week. And Michael, I'll ask you first. I see you got one in the background, but you also mentioned you got one to show us. Which scarf you rocking today?
Well, I thought I'll bring one on that nobody else is probably ever going to bring on to your show. So hanging up behind me, which obviously folk can't necessarily see, but my club in Scotland is called East Fife. Right now, we are in the bottom tier of Scottish football. We used to be really good in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. We've won Scottish Cup, we've won the League Cup, we were the third best team in Scotland for many years. So it's our 120th anniversary. So the scarf that's hanging up behind me is a special one that they brought out for the 120th anniversary. But the one that I'm going to show you is my very first football scarf from 1984. And it's just I mean, there's not much to it. It's just a bar scarf in black and gold colours. But my grandma bought it for me for Christmas 1984. And this is the 40th year of me watching my team, East Fife. And it was actually the 31st of January was the 40th anniversary of my first ever match. So I thought I would bring my first ever football scarf on for you.
I love everything about that. As you can tell from behind me, big fan of different types of scarves, collecting scarves, and you always remember your firsts. So, absolutely wonderful. And what we do here is, well, what I try to do is any sort of team that's connected to an interview guest will eventually get up on the wall. So your club from Scotland is now going to find its way somewhere into the yellow over there,
Oh,
hopefully.
nice.
So I can't wait because that's another really cool one to get. Connor, what do you got?
All right, well, I'm going to do another designated player specialty here. Quick tangent, because I have to mention it considering we have a Vancouver guest on, but I took my first trip to Vancouver last June, and I absolutely love Vancouver. We went to Seattle before and then drove up to Vancouver. Seattle was pretty disappointing, but Vancouver was amazing. Like it saved the whole trip. We loved it. We stayed in West Vancouver. We went to Stanley Park. We did some hiking around the area too, and it was amazing. I wish I could have gone and saw Whitecaps game, but I think they weren't in town at the time. We drove by the stadium. I didn't really get to explore much of it, but love Vancouver. Would love to go back there again at some point. And then for scarf of the week, I guess I'm sure it was very expected, but I do have my Vancouver scarf. I think it says all of our honor if I can read it backwards.
Yeah, our all, our honor.
Yes.
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
it says.
So very nice. Yeah, that's it's on the list of when we eventually do our designated players host travel around the country to see all the stadiums. That's on our list. So we'll get there.
Yeah, well, let me know when you are, and we'll make you feel very much at home.
Oh,
That'd be
absolutely.
awesome. Yeah.
Would love that. For myself, I've got kind of the overlaid whoop, text for Vancouver. Not my
Ah,
favorite.
I have
Um,
never seen that scarf before,
it's a
and
it's
I am not
tough
sure
to
I like
read.
it.
Yeah, it's tough to read. The other side is nice. It's got the logo repeating,
Yeah.
so it's not too bad. But I've got a couple of these with the text kind of overlaid, and when you're far away, it's like okay, I can kind of make it out. But when you get really close, it looks like just a bunch of lines.
Mm.
So it's okay. I think I gave it on my. I did a whole series on like grading the scarves, and I think I gave it like a 6. Like it's all right. It's not too bad. But we need to start grading how Vancouver Whitecaps are going to look this season. I think that's probably the way most people want to hear about it. I don't know if they quite want to hear about the scarves. They want to hear about the team, right? So right now we're looking at Vanni Sartini, one of the most charismatic managers in MLS, taking charge of Vancouver for his third full season since he took over in the interim in 2021. He will be on the sidelines to start, but he does take control of the team and he will guide them through a really tough Western Conference and also trying to balance the CONCACAF Champions Cup, newly rebranded. Last season, they finished in 6th in the West, 13th overall, 48 points, 12 wins, 10 losses, 12 draws, pretty even. And they did lose to LAFC in round one after a really tough first game. What is the vibe right now for Vancouver in general? Do they feel like they're going to be a decent side? Are they worried about anything that they're missing? What are we thinking?
There's a lot of confidence there, partly based on just how the team played last season. There's been some good additions and experienced additions that I'm sure we'll get to. Uh, Sporting director and CEO Axel Schuster has come out and said he feels this is going to be the biggest and the best season in the Whitecaps MLS era. So there's a lot of confidence at the club just now. And I mean, personally, I genuinely think this is going to be one of the most exciting seasons watching a Whitecap side because they play very good, exciting attacking football under Vanni Sartini. They just have to shore up a little bit at the back. We saw a little bit of that last year, and I think we'll see an improvement in that now coming into 24.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of teams right now are feeling for the most part, outside of the odd few that each team has a feeling like this might be a really good year for us because of a lot of the moves. And I guess from your point of view as a supporter, it hasn't been a busy offseason, but what has been the best move they've made so far?
You've got to look at the two attacking pieces that they've added. So I've been a big fan of Damir Krylak since he came into the league. He always played so well against the Whitecaps. I think we were either equal most or second of the teams that he scored goals against. So to add him to the mix, I just think is very exciting. It adds some height to the attack, which we don't have. The big question around him, though, is how healthy is he? Is it going to be the Damir Krylak that we saw in 2021? Or is it going to be the guy that's been struggling with the injury in 22 and 23? And it's hard to tell just now from pre-season, but I think he's such a good piece that he's going to complement but also bring something different to what Brian White brings up front. And if they get that chemistry going, I spoke to Demir in January and he says he's fully over his back issues now. He's rehabbed on turf, so turf doesn't pose any problems to him. And he feels that he's ready to be back to his best. And if he can be, then that is just going to add something special to the Whitecaps attack. So he's been the biggest addition so far, with Fafa Pico just behind, because Vanni Sartini came out and said to us on the show, I don't like wingers, I don't play with wingers. He signed a winger. So how do you use Fafa Pico is an interesting one. How do you use Damir Krylak as well is another one. Will they be bit players off the bench? And if they are, they're exciting pieces to have coming off the bench if you have to try and turn the game around.
I think that's a really interesting point about formation and then players that he signed, because that was the first thing that I thought too. I go, he's always so narrow,
Mm.
and then here comes Fafa Picault, who's made his entire living on the wing. So, Connor, out of curiosity, which is your biggest addition for this side?
Glad you went to me next because I wanted to echo my love for Damir Krylak. I'm not an RSL fan, but I love Damir Krylak. I think he's been super underrated ever since he's been in the league. His RSL days when he was at his best, he was just so fun to watch. I think a really underrated part of his game is his versatility. I feel like I remember him playing so many different positions on the field. Like I'm sure he was at like striker at some points. He was at a 10. He was like playing central midfield. I feel like he probably even played defensive midfield at some point. So to have him on the team to be able to just throw him in there anytime you need somebody in a certain spot. And to your point, if Sartini does like to play a very narrow game, then I think that's even better for him because he can fit so many different positions in the system then. So he was easily for me the top addition as well. I think at 34 now, he's probably not going to come in and be like a complete game changer, best player on the team like he was at times with RSL, but I think he'll still be able to provide that spark in the attack when he does get his game time to help support and aid in the attack with Brian White and Ryan Gauld. So I think they're shaping up to make things very difficult for defenses this season.
For me, I'm going to go the other way. I'm really, really excited for Fafa Picault. I know he's a wide player, but you've seen wide players turn inverted in this system. They've come inside, they've played more as like a wide number 10, and found success. So, for me, a player who's come in with MLS experience, consistent goal scoring in the league, understands how the league runs and how he can get the most out of his attacking movements and things in that nature. I think for me, Fafa Picault is going to be such a good addition. I think Krylak right up there with him, but I also don't know how big of the role Damir Krylak is going to play. Just as you mentioned, with injuries, with age, with the system, where does he fit in? He's so versatile. But I think Fafa Picault can have a consistent, whether it's directly off the bench or as a starting wide number 10. And there are other players who I know are still maybe in the mix to come in here. Um, but for me, I'm really excited to see him provide just something different in the attacking phase for Vancouver personally. So, but both great players to watch, of course. That also comes with some losses, though. Players who had to leave, and Vancouver didn't lose a ton, but they did lose enough in the Vancouver circles. Who's the loss that you guys are going to feel the most? Do you think?
Well, it's a loss just now, but it might actually end up not being a loss because we don't know what's happening with him yet, which is Richie Larea. Now, right now, we've considered that Richie is gone. He's no longer a Whitecaps player. He's gone back to Nottingham Forest. But, I mean, who knows by the time that this comes out what's going to have changed in that regard, because the Whitecaps want him, but Forest want a huge transfer fee for him. And of course, we all know the issues that Forest are having financially and possible points deductions and stuff just now. So they're wanting as much money that they can bring in as possible. So the Whitecaps have basically played hardball with Forest and said, yeah, we're not paying what you're looking for. Transfer window's shut in England. No one's taken him. So his options pretty much are to come back to MLS. So it's whether anyone gives Forest what they're looking for, or whether they cut a deal with the Whitecaps. So he might still be a Whitecaps player. But if we assume just now he's not, then it's going to be a loss because he added so much spark to that Whitecaps attack. Sometimes he tries to do too much. I spoke to him last year and he admitted, yeah, sometimes I try and do too much. He puts a lot of pressure on himself. But what he brought going forward, and also the strength that he had defensively in that wing back position on the right hand side, it's a big loss to the Whitecaps, and one that right now they haven't replaced with any off-season additions. Axel Schuster's told me we're not going to wait forever. So if we can't get him, he will be replaced. But it's whether you're replacing him with as much quality as that, or does Vanni Sartini tweak the formation so that you're not maybe necessarily relying so much on that? And he has tweaked the formation pre-season. He's been playing a kind of weird 3-3-1-3 formation. It's basically 3-4-3, but he likes to call it 3-3-1-3 because Vanni likes to do things a little different. But that could negate the loss, but right now he is the biggest loss.
I'm gonna just piggyback right off you because that's exactly what I said too. Is you guys didn't lose too much, but Richie Lareo's loan ending and not figuring out if he's going to come back or not is probably what you're going to feel the most. You've got a little bit of cover, if you want to shift maybe Brown out there, Javian Brown out there, or um, maybe even flip flop and throw one of the left backs over there. But he was so dynamic going forward. He offered you so much that it's tough to replace just with another player. He was very unique in the way that he played, in the way that he um, covered a lot of ground and did things that not everybody can do. So I think that's the one you feel the most. But again, it's not one of those ones that's a closed door. Like you now need to start the season. You can still uh, address that without it really turning into a huge loss, like you mentioned. Connor, your thoughts on that?
Believe it or not, I'm right on the same page. Uh, I mean, looking through the list of players that left for Vancouver this season, Larea easily jumped out to me, mainly for the fact that I think everybody else that had left, at least at the time when I was researching, had maybe, I don't even think they cracked 500 minutes combined. Although I know Russell Tybert is probably near and dear to many Vancouver hearts because
Mm.
he was maybe not. I figured, considering he was there for so long, that maybe he would rub off on some people. But yeah, Larea was the guy for me. I think he's proven time and time again he could be successful in this league. He did it with Toronto, and I think he did it with Vancouver as well. And I think even though his time in Vancouver was short, I thought he was a really good attacking fullback option, as both of you've already kind of covered. And I think the position without him is a bit thin, as you were both talking about as well. And I had noted down Javain Brown as a potential option out there as well, but considering how narrow he's playing and the 3-3-1-3 as you were talking about, I would imagine that maybe Javain Brown's more used in that like back three kind of formation. I know sometimes he's shifted in as like a makeshift center back, but that worked wonders for Columbus, so might as well keep going with that. So yeah, Richie for me as well.
Yeah. So we're then to this point where we say, okay, the right back is a little low, but is that the biggest roster hole that still needs to be filled? Are there other areas that they need to put some time into? What are our thoughts there?
Probably right back, right wing back is the biggest hole just now.
Hmm.
It would have been centre back. And by that I mean I've wanted and I've been asking for a couple of seasons now. I want an experienced centre back, guy in his 30s, like uh, a Giorgio Chiellini style player. It's like every club wants someone like that. And I spoke to Axel Schuster about that, and I said we need a guy like that. I mean, for a locker room presence, experience, bringing on the young guys. And he says, yeah, but the problem is the guys that's like that are either past it and can't play the minutes that you need them to play, or they demand so much money that they just can't afford to pay. So Chiellini's kind of like, he described him as a unicorn. It's like it's just a mythical centre back that every club wants, but there's not many around. We've signed a Norwegian, Bjorn Inge Utvik, who I know nothing about. He seems to have a lot of experience. And I think it's just going to be a rotational thing in centre back now between probably 5, 6 players, including like Javain Brown. And we'll just see who maybe seizes that. So It's probably covered now at the back, so it has to be right back, right wing back, where the biggest hole is just now. We've got a lot of coverage on the left. Some of the guys on the left can play on the right, but yeah, I think we need that striker going into the season. We needed somebody to support Brian White, so I think we have that now. So you're just looking at that right hand side.
Yeah, the thing I like about Utvik in every picture that I've seen, he's got a real nice scrum hat on, so you know he's not afraid to go up and win a ball in the air. That's
Yeah,
awesome. Um, my thought outside of the right back spot was a little bit of experienced striker depth. Again, Krylak can fill that role. Pico could probably fill that role. But at the time of doing the prep for this, somebody like before he got picked up, a Corey Baird or a Danny Masovsky would have fit really nice into there. I think
yeah.
a number two guy who could also float into an offset nine, a false nine, somebody in that role like Musovsky or Corey Baird, I thought would have been really good. Not to say that Pico and Krylak can't do that, but I thought having somebody who just was truly a number nine behind Brian White would have been really nice to have. That's kind of my other big spot.
I don't even know if I need to add anything because I think you just took my response word for word right there. I also went the striker out. I know that I think Fafa Pico actually. I was just looking this up. Who scored has got him down as playing as a striker in 10 times last year for Nashville. He had 3 goals in those appearances. It's not too bad, but he's not like when I think of Fafa Pico, I don't necessarily like jump right to like him playing as a striker. I think he's capable there if they needed it to be. And I think same thing for Demir Krylak, but I figured if they got someone else who was just like a true number nine, doesn't need to be like top game changer because I Brian White's your guy, and I don't see any reason why someone would come in to replace Brian White, considering he's coming off like 15 goals last year. But
He's my
I,
guy too, by the way.
well, he's definitely your guy over mine. But I figured at least some rotation there would be good, and if they don't get somebody, I don't think it's like a big deal because I think they can make things work. But considering how many competitions and games, as you talked about before, Champions Cup this year, Canadian Championship. There's going to be Leagues Cup, MLS regular season. I mean, not to spoil a segment later on, but likely playoffs as well for Vancouver. So that's a long season. And if Brian White is playing even like 90% of that time as striker, because there's just not too many other options, I'd be a little concerned about fatigue going into the playoffs, maybe, or potential injuries. So I think like one other number nine there, I think would be helpful.
That was one of our issues towards the end of the last season. Is like White and Gold had run themselves into the ground, and at the back, Tristan Blackman and Ranko Veselinovic had run themselves into the ground. So there was a lot of tiredness there. I I genuinely don't think we'll probably have to worry too much about the Champions Cup. I think that might be done and dusted by the time that the MLS season starts. It's just fallen at the worst possible time, these games. And yeah, Brian White, the only problem with Brian White is he's had 2 career seasons now in the last 3 years. How sustainable is that? So he does need some help.
No, I'm not going to spoil a future segment in this episode because that goes quite in line with a couple of questions I have. But yeah, you're to just brief touch on the Champions Cup. Not only is the timing bad, your draw was really tough too.
Yes.
That's not the easiest of you're not getting paired up with some of the easier clubs in this region. So definitely going to be a tough for sure. Um, we mentioned that there are going to be some people who are going to feel tired. They're going to feel maybe a bit overworked. That means people are going to have to step up from the Vancouver camp. Who is the person that we need to watch as the next guy up, the guy who's going to break out and have a career year like Brian White did 2 years ago? Who's that next guy?
For me, it's going to be the midfielder Ali Ahmed,
Ooh.
young Canadian guy, got his MLS deal last year, played a good season, had some injuries, I don't know how many folk who have seen this, but had a horrific, scary injury in the Canadian Championship against Pacific FC. It was a game I was over on Vancouver Island to watch, and the game was stopped for about 30-35 minutes after he went up for a challenge, fell, and I genuinely thought he'd broken his neck, or possibly worse, that he was dead, because that sounds over dramatic, but they brought on covers that went all around him. And when you're seeing that happen, you're like, oh, that this is really, really not good. And there was a lot of frantic things going on. So he had a really good first season, but that derailed it a little bit. He made his Canadian international debut. He also was playing with a hernia injury or a groin injury. I can't remember. I think it was a hernia injury, which he's actually just had surgery for. So he's going to miss about 6 to 8 weeks. But this is the same injury that Ranko Veselinovic had. And then he had this surgery, and then he came back and basically played every single game. So the confidence is high that Ali's going to come back, break into the team as soon as he's ready to go again. And I don't think he'll lose his position. He's a tough midfielder. He's got flair, he's got skill, he's got good defensive presence, and he can play out wide, he can play in the centre. He's going to be the guy to watch this year.
You heard it here first, everybody. Keep an eye out. Connor, do you have anything different?
I do not. I also actually had Ali Ahmed. I hopefully I'm not exposing my lack of ball knowledge here, but I didn't know much about Ali Ahmed before doing research for this episode. Didn't hear. I mean, I think I kind of recognized the name from last year, but didn't really hear much about him. But after checking him out, I saw that he had a really good season last year in
Mm-hmm.
the limited minutes that he got. His so there's a site called FBref. They have a really cool tool on there where they do a comparative graph with a lot of different metrics compared to other players in similar positions. So Ali Ahmed got compared with the other midfielders in the league that qualified, had enough minutes, and he was outrageously strong in midfielders when it came to the attack and passing. He even had a good couple of defensive stats as well. I think he was very high in interceptions and tackles, which is, I'm sure, stats you would want to see high for your central midfielders. So he was also one of three players who had a 7.0 rating or higher on SofaScore. The other two players were Brian White and Ryan Gauld. So that's really good company to be in. So you kind of touched on it before when I was doing some research on it. The Vancouver Reddit was talking about how he had just got that sports hernia surgery recently. So he'll be out for a number of weeks at the start of the season. But I think when he comes back, if he gets the minutes, hopefully some more minutes this season compared to last year, I think he could really take off and be that breakout player.
Very nice. Mine is a bit different because it's less about players who haven't really shown yet, and more of players who I think are going to have better years. And it's Pedro Vite, the attacking midfielder. I think as you look at his stats, right? His first year he came in, he spent very very late in the year, spent it at MLS Next Pro. Comes in 2022, gets about 1,200 minutes, 2 goals, 2 assists. Then you move into 2023, and he's got 2,200 minutes, 4 goals. I'm curious to see and keeping an eye on him to see if this is the year that he can work with Ryan Gauld, Brian White, and get into that mix and take a load off of them. Because as we mentioned, they've done a lot on their own. So I think that he might be the guy, and I know Schaff is also in that kind of mix there. But I think Pedro Vite is the one to watch because he was only 19 when he came here. He's turning into 21 now, maybe 22. Like that's the year that this could be really really big for him. Not only just in terms of Vancouver, but also for the next step, right? If he wants to make that move overseas or what have you, this could be a really big year for him. So he's one of the guys that I'm watching to break out, hopefully.
He's been a little frustrating at times because you can see the quality that's there, and then he shows it in flashes. He has bursts of games, 3, 4 in a row, where he's outstanding. And then he has another 3 or 4 to follow where he just disappears. But I think it's trying to get the regular playing time for him. And that's what's tough because him and Ryan Gauld play very similar. So it's like if you're going to pick one of them, you're obviously going to pick Gauld. And that's not my Scottish bias showing, but for obvious reasons, you're going to pick Gauld. And it's only really when Ryan gets a rest or is an injured or something that VT's been playing. They don't seem to play well when they're on the pitch together. And if they can somehow find a way that they can, then I think that will lift Vite to the next level.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hoping for, from a neutral point, right? Is somebody who can go in and work with Ryan Gauld, because especially a 21-year-old, South American attacking midfielder, that's MLS's bread and butter in terms of flipping and moving, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it could be massive for him if he can find, you know, jump up to 2,600 minutes and make that 4 goals, 10 with 2 assists. I mean, that's your big money move. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm keeping an eye on him throughout the year to see what he can do. Put it all together. Everybody comes in. Season starts. You go 34 games, 36 games. Where does Vancouver finish this year in the Western Conference? That's the question.
I, I would say top four.
Mm-hmm.
We should have been fourth last year. It's like just a couple of results here and there, some bad summer form. We had 7 games in a row away from home, which is obviously going to kill you. Although they did take some good points from it, but got tired towards the end. It's a better schedule. They've got better players. Vanny's come out and said one of the things he wants to learn and improve on is better use of the squad, not rely on the guys so much, rotate guys out for certain games. Now, you could read into that. There might be a game out east where he thinks, yeah, we're not going to have much chance of doing anything here. Let's put some other guys in. So I think if it all comes together, they should be top four. At highest, maybe third. I can't see them challenging for top two just because I think there's some better teams out there. But you look around the West, everyone's strengthened well. A team like Colorado, I'm very interested to see if what looks on paper to be a really good build, if they can then put that into practice. The flip side of that is I don't rate Chris Armas very well. So it's like, how much does he get out of that team? But you've got that, then you've got other teams like the Galaxy that have to be better this year, surely. And then Portland are going to look to be better. So I think if we can get top four, it would be very happy, and I think that is very doable.
As somebody whose club was managed by Chris Armas, and I watched him single-handedly throw away the 2018 season to the team that my co-host supports, which went on very, very well. Um, I agree with you. So it's going to be something to keep an eye on. Connor, I'll ask you predicted finish.
So I don't think the West is necessarily like a weak conference, but I think when I look at the West versus the East, I find that the East I feel like is super stacked, and I think there's a lot of really good teams there that'll finish high in the Supporter Shield. But I think that's something that is going to benefit Vancouver. I think it opens the door for them to finish even better than last year in the West because they stayed pretty consistent. You know, as we were talking about, they really didn't lose too much outside of Richie Larea. So I think that consistency will only be a benefit to them. We know what Ryan Gaul can bring to the table. So I've got them somewhere between I think like third and sixth. So I definitely see them as a clean playoff team, not in the play in or anything like that. I think at the worst, I probably see them finishing similar to where they did last year. I think at the best they can get into the top three, like you were talking about as well. But I do kind of agree. I think there's like maybe one or two teams in the West that might just be a little bit better at the top. Someone like a Seattle, maybe. I think they're very strong, and then I think they've only gotten stronger with the addition of De La Vega. Um, I think a weird team could jump up there as well, similar to like what St. Louis did last season. I think some teams that were ahead of Vancouver will drop. I think LAFC, maybe Houston could drop down further, and Vancouver can take advantage and jump up. So I see them between 3 and 6, probably somewhere more likely like 4 and 5, but I could see anywhere within that range, I would say.
Yeah, I'm kind of spot on with you. I've got them between 4 and 7. I like the side. I think it's got a good build, a good first 11. It's the next 4 or 5 up that I'm kind of iffy on, and those are the guys that I think separate the top from the top who are great versus the next group that are good. And I think that's kind of where Vancouver lies right now. So anywhere between 4 and 7, I definitely have them in the playoffs. I think they're stronger than a lot of Western Conference teams are, especially some of the Western Conference teams that haven't done much, even though they were bad last year. I look at a club like Austin, for example, who I think has a lot of work still to do. Um, so I have them in the playoffs. I don't know if I don't have them in the play in. I think they're better than the 8-9 spot, but I don't know if I necessarily have them safely in the home playoff game. So I've got them between 4 at the highest end, a home playoff series, and then 5, 6, 7. I think is a little bit more likely right now. But again, we need to make our disclaimer before we finish this up. It is February 3rd at 3:57 Eastern time. If a transfer happens after this time, we're sorry we couldn't cover it, and all opinions are made before that was done. The amount of times people have come on to our things being like, how could you forget this guy? It's like we recorded a week before he got
Yeah.
signed. Like, what do you want me to do?
I know it's like because we can't even talk really about what happened in the Tigres game because it's coming up bizarrely in a few days' time. It just feels so soon.
Yeah, and it's wild because the whole thing's happening, but every other MLS side is 2 weeks later.
Yeah, it's basically it's because we got Tigris and the TV companies wanted a big name team in the first week, so we can't even play that game at our stadium because there's a home and garden show on.
Oh wow.
So they couldn't get another stadium that met CONCACAF approval, which surely can't be that high. And we've seen some of these pitches over the years. So we've had to go and play in Vancouver Island, and it's nuts.
I mean, it's tough to beat the stadiums that have a full grown tree behind the stands like Austin played in last year, where there were no fans. It was just a giant tree. I don't know what the requirements were to get there, but here we are.
It obviously worked. It threw Austin off. So maybe that's the strategy. Maybe Vancouver needs to find a stadium with a giant tree behind it.
Listen, they put the tree behind there. Amro Tarek scored the own goal of dreams. So something happened there. There's some magic. I do want to ask our final question here of the segment. You're going into the season. What's the biggest question you want to keep? You want to kind of just watch throughout the year. What's the one thing happening that you're just going to watch as the year develops?
Well, I mean, it was interesting hearing Connor talk about the consistency because here we feel we're not consistent enough, and that is kind of what cost us a little bit. But the question is really, I guess, what you said, Andrew. It's like, can the depth step up? I think we've got a solid 15, 16 guys that you're happy in the first team. But you could be injuries away. Like in recent years, Ryan Gould's had a couple of concussions. Just needs one bad head knock and he could be out for a while. It's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of having a huge, big name designated player because you're just an injury away. And that could be like Messi could get injured in game one, and which is going to affect a lot of ticket sales throughout the league if that happens. But I mean, that's realistically, that's the stuff that can happen. So we need the depth to step up, and we do have a good 15, 16 guys that I'm confident with. But say Brian White went down, can Damir Krylak go a whole season leading the line? I'm not sure he can. You've got a young guy, Levante Johnson, that has the potential. We lost Simon Betcher, which he didn't quite make the breakthrough I'd hoped for. But I think it is really just, can the lower regions of the depth step up? And that's the big question. If they can, and Vanny likes to talk about, I don't have a first 11, I have a first 22. He really didn't. But if he can get a first 22, then we are certainly contenders.
Yeah, I'm coaching at the Division 3 level right now, and we talk about it all the time. We've got 11 to 15 guys that we're happy with, and everybody else has 19, 20, 21 guys, and that's kind of the struggle that we overcame it a bit this year, but last season that was our biggest issue is we had 11, and the second you got to player 13, it was like, what are we gonna do? These
Yeah.
11 need to go 90 minutes every week. and it's
Well,
it's very tough.
I, like the hat I'm wearing, TSS Rovers. It's a local club in D3 here, and I'm the media officer for them. I'm the commentator for them. We had exactly the same thing as well, and the problem is you're only allowed a certain number of over 23s in
Um,
our league. So TSS Rovers produced a Canadian Championship shock. They became the first League One third tier side to knock out a professional team. But they could not play that same team again for the rest of the season in the league because of the rules. So then it's like calling on depth and stuff as well. It's like crazy and infuriating.
oh, I bet. Um, I'll bounce off yours. Mine was the same idea around the depth, but mainly at the striker role, right? Brian White had 15 goals, 6 assists. Ryan Gauld had 11 goals and 12 assists. The next highest goal scorer was four, and then it was I think it was either it was Bichère and Larea or Bichère and maybe Gressel were 4 and 5, and they're both gone. So
Mm.
who steps up if one of them can't, right? And that's kind of the same theme that we've been going on is something that I'm going to watch. Hopefully that they can make it through the whole season, but it's definitely going to be a big question if they can. And then I send it to my friend Connor for the last little bit here.
Yeah, I'll ask something a bit different. My question is not necessarily for the team, but for a player on the team. So my question is, can Ryan Gauld get himself in the MVP conversation this season? So last year he was phenomenal. I think I don't have the second assist numbers here, but he had 11 goals, 12, I guess, first assists last year, which is phenomenal. And I think had to have been like one step below MVP finalist. I mean, I know there were a lot of good guys last year. And I think it would have been tough to crack that top three of Lucci, Buanga, and Almada. But I feel like if Gauld went like a half a step higher than what he did last season, I feel like he's got to be in that conversation, especially if Vancouver finishes in that top part of the range that we were talking about, like maybe around that third place finish in the West. I would imagine that's because Ryan Gauld's been absolutely killing it. So I figure we talked about him getting some help. I think that would definitely be beneficial. Maybe he gets to rest some of these other games that are going on. Maybe some Canadian Championship games, he gets some rest, or Leagues Cup, you get some rotation as well. And so that he's not getting to the end point of the season and getting really sluggish. Uh, I think that could be helpful. And I think just I don't know. I guess another year under his belt. I mean, staying healthy, as you were talking about, would also be a key thing for him to be in the MVP conversation. But I think it's there for him. I think he could do it, and he's got the years in MLS now. He knows the league. He's experienced. He knows Vancouver. He knows the system. So I think if he can get some help around him, he could stay healthy. I can't see why he wouldn't be in the conversation by the end of the year.
Well, he'll be settled too. He's just signed a extension now to 2027. The problem with Ryan, and he's the first to admit this, the last 2 years he started very slow. Now in 2022, it's because he had the two concussions. Last year, he doesn't know what it was. If you look at his stats up until the end of May, he didn't do much. All those stats that he put on the board were from late May onwards. And when you think about that, if he can do that for a full season, then that is MVP quality.
Yeah, that's it. I guess rather than seeing it as a negative thing, I feel like it would be good to see it as like a good opportunity for him. It's like you played so well in the second half of the second part of the season. It's like imagine what you'd be capable of if you um, were able to capitalize more on that first half.
Yeah, and that's what it is, right? It's always consistency, and that's why it's such a tough award to win because you have to be consistent over the length of a season. You can't take a month off. So definitely one to watch for sure because I put him in our top five attacking midfielders in our series. I also side note put Veselinovic as a top five center back. I think he's fantastic. I think he's very very solid. Um, so the team has quality in areas. It's now to make sure that the people who are supposed to come in after them can step up. So definitely stuff to keep an eye on. But outside of that, I think that's all we've got to cover today for the Vancouver Whitecaps. Michael, thank you so much for coming on. We really enjoyed your insight. Again, stuff that we don't just quite see from the outside looking in. So we really appreciate your insight. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Really enjoyed it. Hopefully, it's a good season. It's the club's 50th anniversary season as well. I'm wearing a retro Whitecaps jersey from that 1974 season, and our new away kit is based on that badge, according to the leak, anyway.
Go on.
It's like it's a black and gold version of the original red and white. I
Uh
think we're trying to be so much like LAFC because we keep playing them. It's like we've got them again in the League's Cup, so I think we keep playing them. If we just like look like them now, maybe we'll start winning more.
I had a whole plan to bring out a different scarf for today's episode, and I totally forgot it. I've got the 86ers scarf sitting on the wall,
Oh,
and I totally forgot to break it out because I took a quick look. I'm like, oh, there's a Vancouver one, grab it. And I forgot that I had this one. So I got the 86er scarf too.
yeah, because the Whitecaps started in '74, ended in '84. Then the team came back in '86 as the name the 86ers before reclaiming the Whitecaps name in 2001. So it's arguable whether it's a 50th anniversary, but we're all going with it.
And we'll take it. So I'm glad I got to show this off, and you brought that up because I really wanted to show that because I've had it for so long. Um, we always like to give our guests just a quick, minute and a half. Tell everybody who's listening where they can find you if they aren't following you already. All the socials and all that good stuff.
On X, it is AFTN Canada, AFTN Soccer on Instagram. Although I'm old, I don't really get Instagram, so I hardly use Instagram. You can follow us on the website. It's aftn.ca. Our articles are up there. We cover Whitecaps. We cover all aspects of local Canadian soccer, the Canadian Premier League, League One BC, which is the third tier, and down to the amateur levels as well. Our podcast, our 600th episode is going to be out, I think, the day after this one comes out. So that's quite a big milestone for us as well. So you can check all that out in all the usual places as well.
600. Connor just cringed thinking about doing 600 of these.
The way Andrew has us going, we'll hit 600 by the end of the season.
As we should.
That's fantastic. Like, it's like we try and just do one a week, but we also do an extra thing just as a kind of Patreon thing that isn't Patreon, but we do it like DIY, which is just from my fanzine era. But yeah, 600's been a slog.
Oh, I bet. Connor doesn't know this yet, but the extra Patreon content's coming. That's our next step.
You have to.
Yeah. Just every year we're gonna take another step forward, and Connor's gonna come along for the ride.
That's exactly what we've done, and it's like that's how you grow it. That's what you need to do, and it's like as long as you're enjoying it. I mean, I produce my show for myself. It's got lots of weird things in it that a lot of folk here don't understand. We ask players things that they don't understand about food. Like our big thing is, do they want a chocolate digestive? A lot of folk here will have no idea what a chocolate digestive is. So we have all these stupid segments. I do it to please myself, and if anyone else is along for the ride, that's all the fun.
And that's exactly how we do ours too. As long as we're enjoying it, we keep going. So, but Michael, thank you so much again for coming on. We really, really appreciate your time. Everybody go check him out. Go follow him along for all of your Canadian soccer and Vancouver Whitecaps news. And we will see you on the next episode of the Designated Players podcast. See ya.